Welcome to our webinar titled Intimacy and Bone Marrow Failure. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lee Clark, and I'll be moderating the presentation today. As we get started, I'd like to recognize the generous support of our corporate sponsors and the generous support of our patients, families, caregivers for supporting the webinar today. Due to the high volume of teleconferences on the internet, it is possible you may lose your connection during the program. If you are unable to view the program online, you can call in and hear the audio portion using the call-in number in your reminder email. Today's program will be archived to our website within 2 to 3 business days. You will be notified by email when it is live and ready for viewing. Immediately following the presentation, there will be a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. To submit a question or comment, open the Q&A window in the lower part of your screen. Type in your question in the small text box window, and when you have finished typing, just hit enter. We will do our best to get to everyone's questions today. When asking questions, I do ask that you do 2 things to help me manage the incoming questions. First, submit your entire question all at the same time. Please do not share private health information in your question. Our expert cannot answer any specific questions related to your personal health care. Today's specialist is Tanya M. She is a national award-winning sexuality educator and expert in the areas of human equality and sexual health. She is an alumni of North Carolina Central University's Department of Health Education, where she has served as an instructor for the past 10 years. Tanya currently is a lead instructor for Human Sexuality. Next week, Tanya will be completing her doctoral program in Human Sexuality Studies. Congratulations on completing your program, Tanya. We're so happy for you. With all of that said, it is my pleasure to welcome Tanya to share with us today.
Good evening or afternoon. Thank you, Lee, so much for that wonderful introduction. I am so excited to be with you all today and look forward to an engaging conversation around Sex 101 is what I call it, but the new normal and looking at how it may be challenging and strategies to deal with your sexuality as you're managing chronic illness or any illness really. And so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And I know that we aren't able to fully engage as this is a webinar, but what I am gonna ask you is to participate fully and think about some of the questions I'm going to pose, or there's at least one activity is gonna require you to write. So my goal here today is really to define sex and human sexuality for you. You may think you know, but oftentimes we kind of know the basics, and we kind of need to get out of the box of the mechanics of sex and human sexuality. And I really want to discuss, and this is where you play a part, your own sexual frame of reference. And then really think about practical conversations and ways that you can discuss your sexuality, not only with your partners, but with your physicians as well. It can be challenging at times to have these conversations. And then think about the challenges of sex and chronic illness and disease. Sorry, I'm trying to move my mouse. So here's where you get to actually actively participate. So wherever you are viewing from, if you could grab a piece of paper, it could even be a sticky, like a scrap sheet of paper. And I want you to really think about how you come into this workshop and what frames your view on sexuality and sex as a whole. So I'm gonna give you like a minute, so maybe not a full minute. It's like the virtual minute is actually 30 seconds probably to grab a slip of paper, scrap sheet, anything. You can even use your phone if you're not viewing from your mobile device, and go to a notes page or a text message. Just don't send it to anybody. And so I want you to write down, and you can write down the numbers 1 through 8, or you could just write it as I go through each statement. Because what you're writing down is your own personal response. And we're gonna create a frame of reference here. So the first thing I want you to write down. So number 1 would actually be the year or the decade in which you were born. So what is the year or decade you were born? Was it the 90s, 92, 70s, 72, 50s, 52? Most of my family was actually born in 52, 42, 62, and 72, and 82. So that resonates with me. So the year that, or decade that you were born. Then for number 2, I would like for you to write down the region of the United States if you're have been living there, you are viewing from the United States, where you are viewing from. So is it the East, West, Midwest, South, North? Write that down, and maybe where you spent the most of your life. Was it in the East, West, Midwest, South, or North? Okay, we're gonna move on to number 3. And number 3 is about your identity as a whole. Like, what is your race and your gender identity? So how do you identify in terms of race and gender? All right, we're gonna move on to number 4. So this is about your cultural background. If you practice a religion, what is your faith position? So number 4 is like your faith position, and it could be in the past or it could be current. So what is your positionality around religion, faith, and other cultural aspects? That's number 4. And you don't have to worry about making this diagram. If we were together, we would make this and create a beautiful object to work with. But we're just going to write it down for now. And then number 5, I want you to think about, now here's the trick question. When did you first become sexual? Now, listen to what I'm saying. When did you first become sexual? So that's number 5. Again, you're not going to share any of this, right? When did you first become sexual? And then number 6, think about a message regarding sex or sexuality that you receive from your parents, guardians, or whomever raised you, right? One message, regardless of what it was, that you received from parent, guardian, or whoever raised you, wherever you were, your upbringing. And then we're going to move on to a message or from a song. Like maybe what was a song that you recall that kind of made you think about sex or had sex in it? What was the message or the song title? Write that down. That's number 7. A message from a song that you recall that was sexual to you, or the song title. One of the things that pops up in my mind right now is Pony by Genuine. I don't know, Google that later. I don't know why that resonated with me today. And then number 8, in a similar way, the last one is, what movie do you recall feeling like there was something sexual, maybe in the title or scene or something about the movie that you were kind of like, oh, I remember that movie because. And I openly always share that I remember my sister at a young age took me to see the movie Fame, if you're not familiar with the original Fame. And I felt like that was a very sexual movie. It's about music, school, but I remember some scenes there that I was thinking, I don't think I should be watching this right now. Okay, so whatever you wrote this down on, when you look, I want you to just look at it. And this is only a part of the frame of reference. Like how you come today is about like what year and decade, what was happening when you were born, where you live, your geographical location, your own identity around race and gender, your faith and religious background and upbringing, or current practice. That influences how you view sex and sexuality as well. The messages that you receive from your parents. You know, some parents will say abstinence, remain abstinent, don't have sex until you get married. Others might have wanted to say that, but in a different way. It's like, just don't get pregnant. Never really saying, hey, maybe you should wait and have sex, or giving you information on if you're going to have sex, maybe use some contraception. It's very clouded messages sometimes from our parents, although we know they did the best they could. And then what about a message or song? So I already gave you, mine was Genuine, Pony, and then a movie being Fame. So how you show up in this space has been influenced by all of this. Your socialization influences what you currently think about sex, even though some of this may have happened years ago. Now let's go back to this trick question. And I'm gonna ask Lee for permission to cheat. And even if you don't use your own age, right, or the time frame, let's cheat a little bit in the Q&A just for this purpose, and ask a couple of people to put in the Q&A whether it's your age or someone, or you think someone becomes sexual. So we're going to cheat technically right now in the Q&A and use that, if you will. If anybody, you can get at least 4 wonderful volunteers who are paying attention to use the Q&A and offer ages or time frame when you think you became or people become sexual. So now I'm looking in the Q&A and I see a few responses, and you can also do this anonymously, right? Yes, thank you. All right, one more brave person. Awesome. So when I'm looking in the Q&A, I'm seeing ages like 13, 9, 13, 15, and even 17. And what typically happens when I ask this question and ask people to think about their own self, when did you become sexual? Most people will put the time frame of when they think someone has actually engaged in a sexual behavior. And for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to use anal, vaginal, or oral sex, right? So people think that's the first time that an individual has engaged in one of those behaviors. Other people will use a time frame that is specific to puberty. So when might someone start puberty? For some, it's as early as 9. For others, it's as early as 13. Here's the news flash. We are sexual beings the time we are born, actually in utero. Think about it. So we're sexual beings as soon as we come out into the world. And I'm going to tell you more about how that works. But think about if your parents or whomever raised you after you were born, loving, hugging you, touching you, that was a part of your sexuality. Exploring your body and touching yourself. Like, our brain is our biggest sex organ, and our skin is the largest organ of our whole body. So touch, which is a part of our sexuality, is one of the biggest things related to our sexuality. So we are sexual beings as soon as we are born. And so I want to dive more into that. So this is how we have to change the frame in the way we look at sexuality. So this is the only statistic. I know sometimes I've gone to some of the workshops and webinars, and there are other doctors who have research, and I'll probably do more of that later. I'm going to not totally become that person, but it's good to have statistics. So I bring you one. And I want you to know that the statistic says 100% of us are sexual beings. Now, it doesn't matter related to your sexuality. Like, we know there are different orientations and attractions, and specifically thinking about asexuality, where there's typically no sexual or romantic attraction to any individual. But even that is a sexuality, because there's an identification for that. So 100% of the people are sexual from the time that you were born to the time that you died. Now, how you manage, navigate, and the way you even behave in the time from the time you were born to the time you die, it's probably going to change dramatically, but we're sexual beings from that time. One of my favorite quotes is from Sophia Loren. Very famous actress. Some may know and some may not. But Sophia Loren offers up that sex is more than an act of pleasure. Sex is the ability to be able to feel so close to a person, or even people sometimes, so connected, so comfortable, that it is almost breathtaking to the point you feel you can't take it. And at this moment, you often become a part of them. And I would even offer to Sophia Loren, part of our sexuality is also the way we even feel about ourselves in contrast or in context to another individual or people. So understanding your frame, all that stuff that you wrote down, requires a level of sexual intelligence. And that is a level involves self-understanding. What are the things I like? What don't I like? What has happened perhaps in my past that not forces, but is the reason why I don't like it, or the reason I do like it? Or what am I even willing to explore? What haven't I tried that I'm interested in trying that I actually might like? Our interpersonal sexual skills, being able to communicate with our partners, being able to have information to communicate, which lends into the scientific knowledge. We get a lot of information about sexuality, specifically from a prevention standpoint. We don't get as much about how to take care of it, how to nurture it, and how to engage in pleasurable things that may not require anyone else, right? Also requires us to learn about ourselves. So another important aspect, which is why I ask you about your race, your gender identity, and your geographical location, because culture plays a part in how we see sexuality and understanding our frame. So where we grew up, what communities we were exposed to, did we do world travel and acknowledge, opportunities that we might have viewed masculinity and femininity and what that even means, and does that even mean anything to us, the binary, right? There may be people who that doesn't resonate with them, but your sexual intelligence requires all of this to work together so that you can make responsible, or the decisions, when I say that responsible, the decisions that are best for you also, and in that moment of time, because sometimes we make decisions based on what's happening in that moment, and that context is important too. And then all of that is influenced by our beliefs and our values. So that's our sexual frame of reference, and it requires a sexual intelligence. So when we think about defining sex and sexuality, it encompasses all the things I just said: what you know, what you believe, your attitudes about things, your values, and then the behaviors of individuals. Some people will say, well, if you like it, I love it, about behaviors. That doesn't actually mean anything. But what we can say is, if you like it, I don't have to love it, but I want you to enjoy it and be safe. That should be, we oftentimes in my profession use the term, don't yuck my yum. Because you might engage in something that I don't want to engage in. It doesn't really bring me pleasure, and I might even be afraid of it. But if you enjoy it and it brings you pleasure, you do it, and you just be safe. Another part of defining sex and sexuality is really thinking about how our bodies work: anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. All of that works together. So we have body parts, we have hormones, and we have a nervous system, all connecting how we can even function in our sexuality, or what we even think, how our brain works to imagine or to fantasize, right? If those things aren't necessarily working at 100%, it can present challenges to our sexuality. I'll be totally transparent. And I'm going to talk about this later. So I'll hold on and talk about it later, but I'll share like how your sexuality can be impacted by when your body is not well. And I think that's the purpose of this being here. Sex is also influenced by, that's what I was talking about, cultural and faith, your ethical, spiritual, cultural, and moral values. So I'm going to move on. Aspects of our sexuality include, how do we identify? So if I'm someone who identifies as a female, feminine, what type of relationships? Am I in a monogamous or open, polyamorous relationship or open relationship? Do I believe in certain practices and behaviors? And then, am I healthy? Are my reproductive organs or sexual organs functioning at full capacity? All of this encompasses that. Now, here's my favorite thing by Dr. Dennis Daly and Pamela Wilson. They created a model called the 5 circles of sexuality. Now, what I love about this model, and you'll see here on the screen, as these circles aren't just like hanging out by themselves, they're overlapping because they overlap. Ideally, they probably should be squeezed in a little bit together because they all overlap. Now, what we learn as we're going through formal education and maybe even with our home life, we typically get so much from the sexual health and reproduction circle. This is where we talk about bodies and how they function. So learning your anatomy, also learning how to prevent pregnancy, or doing family planning, making the decision to become pregnant, or how to prevent getting someone pregnant. It may talk about even the sexual response, which is the time from arousal to orgasm, and how that all works together. We get a lot of information. Menstruation, right? That's there. Pregnancy and aftercare, prenatal and postnatal care. A lot of what we get and a lot of what we even teach young people comes from this circle. Secondly, after that, typically we go into the power and sexualization, the role that power and sexuality plays. So like flirting, which can be positive or negative depending on the context, but certainly harassment, sexual abuse. Many of Americans or people in general have experienced child sexual abuse and sexual trauma that we're all still navigating. So we get messages from here and learnings from here because we want to prevent that and protect ourselves and even young people. Oftentimes we even see it when we're talking about people who identify as female, when we know that harassment and assault typically has a higher rate in females, but ultimately anyone can experience that. So we get our second messages from there. Now, our third messages oftentimes, and sometimes they overlap and overpower these other two, because I'm using female statistics, right? Statistics on sexual harassment and assault is linked to the sexual identity, because I identified part of the gender identity is female. So our sexual identity is about like our biological sex, our gender identity. So our biosex is what is placed on your birth certificate. Your gender identity is how you identify. And if that's binary, you hear people say binary, like male or female, but we know that some people are gender nonconforming or transgender. So sexual identity, we hear a lot about that as well, and even at a young age. It also represents gender roles. What is a man supposed to do? What is a woman supposed to do? What is masculinity? What is femininity? Should boys wear pink? That's where we get that. Like those messages come to us. So those three circles are pretty heavy in our lives. What we rarely talk about, and what I hope you get from today, is that that's only a part of your sexuality. What's missing is conversations about intimacy and sensuality. So that's why I put the stars there. So in intimacy, it's about your ability to connect with someone else and be extremely satisfied and comfortable and content by yourself. That's intimacy. Intimacy means sharing, caring, loving, disclosing information, being vulnerable in that disclosure, or being vulnerable with your emotions. That's what intimacy is. I often ask people, have they seen the show Catfish? And if you don't know Catfish, I guess it still comes on, but it's a show about people who get in relationship with other people that they've never met, that they learn or meet them on social media or some other app, and they connect. We all long for connection. How long that connection, how deep that connection is going to vary, but that's what we don't learn about intimacy. Even if you think about how your feelings could be hurt if a friend or a loved one doesn't return a call or a text to you. That's related to your intimacy, because you want to be connected. You're like, where are you? I need to know, I need to talk to you. That's intimacy. And intimacy is so important because on that show Catfish, what happens is there's a persona, there's an identity that someone says that they are. This person gets connected with them, and then they start wondering, I don't think this is real. And most often it is not. So it's someone who's insecure about their identity, or someone who just wants to be mean and malicious and tricking people. But the reason why you can get catfished and your feelings hurt is because we long for that connection. And we need to teach about the emotional exchanges and the closeness between people. And intimacy is just not about romantic partners. It's about friends. It's about family and loved ones. It's how people can say, blood isn't always thicker than water, right? Because like there could be some people, like you might have siblings, but you're closer to another individual than you are even to your siblings, or the reason why you adore and love your very, very best friend. That's what intimacy is. We don't talk a lot and learn how to navigate intimacy. So connecting with one another in a really deep way. I've heard people say, into me, I see, like, or you see, right? Because that's the way we connect, is learning about each other. Another area that we don't talk a lot about is sensuality. Sensuality is related to our senses, our five senses, a way that we can experience pleasure both physically and psychologically. If you think about how it feels to hear someone's voice, if you haven't talked to them in a long time, still kind of even overlapping with intimacy, right? Or when you hear someone, I guess people may still use the term sweet nothings, I don't know. But if someone says something romantic to you, kind of going back into that sexual health and reproduction, because that might be desires, that might bring you pleasure, that might be a turn on, so to speak. So that's how our sexuality works. Our five senses really play a huge part. These should be the two circles that we talk about more. How touch plays a part, how taste plays a part. And even when you go back to, like I said, we're sexual from birth to death, that infant, that baby being touched by someone, that's part of their growth and sexual development, is being understanding what touch is. When they're being breastfed, if they're breastfed, how they connect with the mother, or chest fed, if they connect with the mother or the parent that's chest feeding them, then they are connecting through their senses. They can't talk, they can't really communicate. It is all about the senses, and the parent can actually hear and see and smell, and they can touch each other. That is ultimately why our sexuality is so critical, and understanding how to navigate when things physically aren't necessarily working the way we had hoped they worked when we were younger, or because of some other illness or situation. So our sexual behavior is totally influenced by our senses. And you think about verbal and nonverbal communication, when people say somebody gave you that look, or when you hear something, when you can touch them. Look at the millions of dollars that I guess Victoria's Secret and other perfume companies spend on in Valentine's Day trying to get people to purchase that right scent for a loved one. You know, that's how we know it's a huge part. And ultimately, with sex and sexuality, it's all in our brains. So it's more about above the waist than it actually is below the waist. So your five senses are controlled by your brain, your hormones are controlled by your brain, your nervous system is controlled by your brain. If you think about the pituitary gland, it's going to control and manage part of when you're going through puberty. And if that's working properly, your limbic system is about memories and even smells connected to memories. Your cortex, or your frontal lobe, is about decision making. So all of it is really in your brain. Sex is in your brain. So if you don't leave with anything today, understand that sex is more about above the waist in your brain than it is about below the waist and other body parts. And so how does your body control it? Here is what we know. So with sexual response, it goes from that maybe you saw something, or heard something, or felt something, or tasted something, and it stimulated a desire in you to connect with someone sexually. Doesn't mean you engage in any of the behaviors I was talking about, but there's a connection, like there's something going on in the brain, and there's going to be something happening in other parts of your body, right? Even if it's just like you start sweating or whatever, like there's a response. So when we think about these senses, we know they play a huge part, even in everyday life. Excuse me. What I was going to offer to you in full disclosure is, we have COVID. One of the symptoms of COVID-19 is the loss of taste and smell. And I had COVID about 4 months ago, and I lost the sense of taste and smell. I still haven't fully developed it back. And I remember how it impacted me as a sexual being, not being able to taste, not being able to smell. Some of the things that bring me the most pleasure is related to taste and smell. And I don't mean with somebody. Like, I love ice cream. One of my favorite flavors is mint chocolate chip. You have the mint that pulls through and the chocolate that pulls through. And a lot of people don't like that. They think it's gross. But ultimately, I can't taste the mint, and I can barely taste the chocolate. It actually tastes not so great to me anymore. And so that doesn't bring me joy or pleasure anymore. And so that's impacting me as a sexual being, because that's one of the things I enjoy doing. And I have to navigate, how am I going to get pleasure in other ways? So your senses really do play a part in your human, your sexuality and how you experience pleasure. So let's dive into it. With touch. So we know sexual touching is very important, and it is related to sexual stimulation, like I was talking about, going through that sexual response from desire to arousal to the next phase, all the way to orgasm, right? Gentle touching and caressing of the skin. That can happen whether you do anything, like just being physically present with people. A lot of folks love cuddling, or they love hugs, or spooning. Spooning is one of my favorite things. Like when you talk about bodies that are kind of cupped in together, that is another way that touch plays out in our sexuality. Things that you can do that are safe and low risk, and wouldn't cause any issues with your skin, bruising, or anything. And then sight. Remember I was talking about Victoria's Secret or whatever? We know that there are companies, when we think about like pornography or other erotic materials, millions of dollars being spent to provide visual stimulation in our world. That's why we all have these small little devices, many of us glued to us at all times. Companies, these social media apps and anything, they know, even the phone, the developers of these phones know how to bring us in and stimulate our vision. So books and magazines and television. So sight plays a major part in our sexuality. When we think about smell, so going back again, Victoria's Secret, I was saying earlier about it with sight, they pick out the colors that are black, red, things that stimulate you. Even food companies do that with yellow and orange to get you to, like, you're like, well, I'm not hungry, but am I? You don't know, because your brain is like reacting to the colors. So when we think about smell, the same thing. So if you're able to smell your partner, like just the natural scent or the pheromones of that partner, that can bring you joy and pleasure. And then hearing beyond music, but also words and sounds, that it impacts your sexuality, or it helps you flourish it and develop it. And then with taste, including food, like we're never going to discount food, because like ice cream is my favorite thing, but taste, like kissing a partner, any of that sensual act can be sensual right by itself, like just kissing and spending time. Again, it's a physical connection. Your brain is in control because your senses are in control. So if you had a bag beside you, I was going to ask you this, but even if you just look around wherever you are, I want you to pick out one item that relates to your senses that brings you joy. It might be your earphones. It might be one of my favorite things, especially during COVID. I've been sitting at this desk days in and days out working, and I have a whole jar of lip glosses, which somebody might say, well, why? Well, it brings me joy. So we're talking about the senses, right? So this lip gloss smells well, smells good. It feels good going on. And part of our sexuality is how we feel about ourselves. I think this is a good color for me. I like it. So if you were to look around at your desk, table, bedside, wherever you're viewing this, pick an item. I even have some smell good. Now, currently, not smelling all of this, but I have it here because also it brings me pleasure. So you might have a candle beside you. You might, like I said, earphones, anything, or maybe it's something soft that you keep near you that you like to rub on or have near you, a blanket. So think outside of the sack, as in the bedroom, when you're thinking about sexuality, and because with sensuality and intimacy, it is beyond that. It is beyond that. You can enjoy and have pleasure beyond an actual sexual act. When we think about health issues, we know that greatly. Like, so I was just sharing about my recovery from COVID. Some of you may had a blood condition that's going to limit maybe how you feel or what you even want to do, or you want to be careful in what you want to do. What can happen is you can have reduced sexual desire when you're not fully functioning, and you might have low energy. It may be the last thing on your mind, but you want to encourage yourself and the partner to maintain a connection. Again, using those senses. It doesn't have to be anal, oral, or vaginal, or any of those behaviors. It can be spooning. It could be holding hands. It could be massage. It could be kissing. thinking about ways you can connect sensually with someone or by yourself. Sometimes there's pain and discomfort. So think about things that you can do to reduce the pain or, modify what you've been doing so that it doesn't cause any pain. Sometimes our medications or just overall what we're dealing with can cause dysfunction or challenges with maintaining or getting an erection if you have a penis, if you have a vulva or a vagina. Sometimes even there could be medication side effects or just age in and of itself can cause issues with the lack of lubrication and also cause discomfort. So learn about, different types of lubes or natural lubrication, things like, I know if you're not having like penetrative sex and using like condoms, then you can actually use natural oils and aloe vera to help with dryness if you don't want to use something else or something like hormonal. Some people don't want to do that. So there's ways to navigate some of the things that can impact that. Then there's some folks who might have a delayed orgasm or ejaculation, difficulty reaching it. And here's another thing that we've been socialized. So I keep talking about the sexual response, and at the end of it is orgasm. What we also have to know as sexual beings is that desire is a part of that, and it can just start and stop. Arousal is a part of that. It can stop and start. When you get into a plateau, that could stop. Sexual pleasure should not be centered around orgasm for the main reasons of what we're looking at on the screen, because we don't know. Some people, for various reasons, may not be able to orgasm. And we often can orgasm in different places of our body. So we can reach a level of climaxing without being penetrated or penetrating someone else. So we have to think outside of, again, the sack and think about ways that I can pleasure myself or someone else that doesn't have to end in orgasm. Things can be extremely pleasurable without orgasm. And then think about painful intercourse. So we're talking about using lubrication, but sometimes the reflux of our muscles, the vagina is a muscle, the penis is a muscle, the anus is a muscle. Sometimes penetration can be painful. Most of those parts are pink and surrounded with mucous membranes or comprised of mucous membranes and nerve endings and blood vessels. So sometimes the pain can be caused by a number of different reasons, even psychologically, like just thinking about something that could have been traumatic or you don't want it to happen again. And it can be really, really scary. So think about, how can I navigate this, my sexuality with someone when I want to avoid that? And these are the things that you can consider here on the last few slides. So you can plan sexual activity. If you want to engage in any sexual activity, you can plan it for a time of the day when you know you're going to have the most energy and that your health problems are the least problematic. So if you're taking a medication, for example, and then one of the side effects impacts you by 3 o'clock, then maybe do it before 3 o'clock or after 3 o'clock. That's why you have to use those interpersonal skills, because you have to communicate with your partner. Make sure that you get rest and relax. Like nowadays, I think we're just like going. Even during the pandemic, if you're working and you're doing virtual work or trying to engage virtually, give yourself a break. One of my biggest advices, put this down. I don't need to know every post on social media. I don't need to answer every email. Look, I just looked at it. Every email right away. So give yourself time to relax and be rested. If it's in energy wise as well and nourishment, wait at least 2 hours after eating before engaging into, any sexual behavior. That way you are nourished, your food has properly digested, and you're able to engage without any issues or concerns. Make sure you take your required medication though ahead of the time. So usually with most medications, within 30 minutes, any of the side effects that are going to occur, or at least I won't even say the side effects, the medication has done what it's supposed to do or started doing what it's supposed to do. So it's less about the side effects, more about the effectiveness of the medication. But even then, think about what the side effects could be. limit your alcohol and tobacco. So a lot of people, I teach at a college course, my students believe that alcohol and marijuana make sex so much better. Although there's one research study that does talk about marijuana, but that's a whole nother workshop. But ultimately, because we know that alcohol is a depressant and so is tobacco, it slows down our response. Now, if everything is about here, remember we said it's up in the brain, above the waist. If you're impaired or tobacco is slowing you down in oxygen level, it's going to affect your sexual function. So you want to limit alcohol use and tobacco use. Prevent it if you can. And think about the medication that might have an impact on your sexual function. But then you have to have, this is where your interpersonal communication plays a part. When I was talking about side effects, talk to your provider, because you don't want to just stop taking your medication, but you want to have a conversation with your provider. One of the biggest, it's not related to like blood conditions. Well, actually it is in a sense, like high blood pressure medication for many individuals, specifically those who have penises, right? Men or who identify as men or have penises, if they're using their penis for sexual activity, because the way blood pressure medicine works and because the way erections work, a lot of times a negative side effect or a side effect that's hard to or challenging to manage is maintaining, getting an erection. And so some people will say, well, I'm not going to take my blood pressure medicine. Well, you're on this medicine to maintain and balance your blood pressure. Once you start taking it, your body's going to have a hard time managing. It's causing pressure on your heart. So that's a conversation to have with your physician about ways to take it or alternative things you can do so you can keep taking your medication and hopefully maintain and get an erection. There's also things like we just said, orgasm isn't everything about sexual pleasure. There's also things and tools and devices that you can use to help you with erection and maintaining it. There are great things out there. As a sexuality educator, if you want to reach out to me, I can connect you with so many resources for anybody and anybody's size and how they identify. Here's the biggest thing though, communicating with your partner just as much as you communicate with your physicians. And I'm going to be honest, physicians get basically, if any, they get a minimum of like 8 to 10 hours around sexuality. So if you're going to your doctor, they know about your condition. That's what they were trained in, but they don't get a lot about sexuality or how that works with the conditions or the things that they know how to treat. And so help them by having a dialogue with them so they can learn more, and you do your research too. But with your partner, the same holds true, because they don't know exactly what you're going through. And if they're also your partner as well as your caregiver, then that can be challenging. But it presents an opportunity for you to fully communicate and being open and honest about what you're experiencing. And I love the fact that if you have open communication with your partner, you can talk about things that you like and don't like, and things that you're willing to try, right? So do we want to try a massage tonight? Let's talk about that. Do we want to try something else? Like, so having the conversation, like what brings you pleasure? What brings me pleasure? How they can fit in with me managing my condition or you managing your condition, and what is gonna, bring us the most pleasure for each other and individually. If you're engaging in anal, oral, vaginal, but in particular anal or vaginal, think about different sexual positions to accommodate your body's changing abilities and functions. And maybe you need to use pillows, maybe you need to be on the floor. Even now you can buy even more devices. I know instead of even buying something that is made for you to be positioned, learn how it works, and you can actually use pillows and blankets to stack your body in different ways. So there's things that you can do to make it more accommodating and minimize positions that's going to cause you to bear more weight or tire you out, because ultimately it's about the connection and the intimacy. Again, orgasm is almost like a bonus. If anything, I don't even know if bonus is the right word, but it doesn't have to end in orgasm. Trying the personal lubricant. So I was just talking about those. So our primary lubricant that we talk about as being safe is water-based, but there's so many lubricants, y'all. Like you can use silicone if you need to. It gives a little more slip. Water's going to dissolve or dry out or evaporate. So you can use that depending on if you're using latex condoms. You primarily want to use water-based lubricant. But if you're using polyurethane or polyisoprene, I typically have some sitting on my desk if I can get it without being too distracting to you all. Oh, that's not it. But just trust me, there are condoms out there that are non-latex condoms. Like here's one, it's Lifestyles, and it's called Natural Latex Free. It's made out of polyisoprene, and there are plenty of brands out there. I'm not advertising a brand by any means, but polyisoprene, polyurethane, you can use silicone, you can use glycerin. They have been tested. They don't break down like a latex condom does. Personal lubricants, also for if there's vaginal dryness, like coconut oil. So you got to be careful like where you're going to buy it from, but talk to your provider or people at like the GNCs, the drugstores, or wherever they sell coconut oil to talk about it. You can actually use that. Coconut oil absorbs well, and it dries pretty fast. And then talk about with your partner about the appointments and planning sex time or sensual time or connection time, and conserve your energy for that time so that you can both get the best out of it. And then consider self-stimulation and mutual stimulation. So sometimes it's about being together or bringing pleasure to yourself. Maybe you can't connect, or maybe you do that before or after. So it's good to communicate what your needs are and know yourself as well. So I know I'm coming up against time. I want to keep going. The biggest thing I like to leave with you is about that brain again, and learn how to do mental arousal, fantasy, play music, meditate. Think about all the things that bring you pleasure, even before sex or whether you're going to have sex or not. Think about self-stimulation and stimulation around your genitals. Practice on yourself. There are, again, toys, devices, things that you can use. I can't express, you've seen this up here like 3 times already. Personal lubrication. Gotta have it. Should be using it. I already talked about orgasms don't have to be the end result. So think about the ways to pleasure one another and yourself without orgasm. Definitely fall back on ways to utilize and stimulate your senses. And then, again, think about the whole experience. Oops, sorry. And so I know I'm at 10 minutes till, and I definitely want to be able to answer any questions that you actually might have. So I'm going to stop sharing, see if we have any questions. I've really enjoyed my time with you, and see what questions we have.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for the wonderful presentation. So our first question surrounds dating. When you're a patient who is in the beginnings of a relationship and you may be having some sexual dysfunction or due to the medications that a patient is taking, at what point do you have the conversation, and how do you go about talking about you're on medication and there may be some challenges with intimacy in a relationship?
That's a great question. And it makes me think about, like we were talking about, the intimacy circle. So that's kind of where that falls in, about taking a risk and being vulnerable. So for some people, they're able to disclose information immediately, even before decisions are made about, like, are we going to be physically intimate with one another? For others, it's going to take a while, like it might be months or days. And so you need to figure out what you're most comfortable with, and understand that once you disclose, that's voluntarily. When someone else shares your information, that's involuntarily. So you have to think about what is the worst thing that could happen upon sharing. And when you think about that, like maybe write it down and say, well, what will I do? How do you respond to that worst thing? And it's like planning. I wish I could say, do it in a day, do it in a month, but it's based on the individual. For some people, talking to them upfront about your health is important because here's a communication that you can have with them. And then you can say, but it affects me this way, but I'm willing to navigate, or I already know how. That's why we're having this conversation today. I already know how, or have some tips on how to navigate that so that we can be fulfilled in this area. That makes sense.
Thank you so much. Um, we have a question that says, do anti-seizure meds and brain damage affect lack of pleasure? Also, what about nerve damage? Does that also affect lack of pleasure?
It actually is possible, but it depends on where the nerve damage and like parts of the body that are impacted. So we have something called the vagus nerve. It's kind of like, in a sense, a pleasure powerhouse, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so even people who have like really strict physical limitations or paralysis, they can experience pleasure and orgasm because their brain is still working and the vagus nerve is the powerhouse. So even through physical stimulation, although they might not feel anything, they can actually orgasm. So it really depends on what parts of the brain is impacted and what parts of the anatomy are impacted by the brain. I'm not sure. I've never heard of seizure medication impacting. I've heard that seizure medication can impact desire, not necessarily function or pleasure.
Thank you. Patients who have a compromised immune system can be terrified of sexual connection. Any tips on how to overcome this?
Oh, first of all, communication. If you're going to engage with someone, um, talk to them about like, have they been tested for any infections, like sexually transmitted infections or anything else? Because that's usually one of the biggest risks around this. And then if they haven't, talk about going getting tested together. Normalize getting tested. It's not about trust. It's not about anything else. It's literally about taking care of yourself so you can have the healthiest sexual relationship as possible. Secondly, like I was just talking about condoms, wear condoms or use some type of barrier method in addition to that, and talk about the reasons why. Ultimately, people look at condoms as like, well, there's trust, there's risk, and it's scary. But condoms can also enhance pleasure depending on the type of condom you use, like I was just talking about, the type of lubricant you use. So use barrier methods that can help increase the protection so that nothing can get transmitted.
Thank you so much. This question has two parts. I'm going to read the first part of the question. This is regarding a patient with low platelets who has experiencing small amount of bleeding during intercourse while using a lubricant. And they want to know that if this is okay. I'm going to say this question is best answered by the person's treating physician. The second part of the question says, they also seem to have some tightening of muscles during intercourse, so he cannot fully penetrate. How do you overcome this if this is part of the brain causing the tightening of your muscles?
Can you
Any
repeat that one more
suggestions?
part again?
Sure.
The first part.
So the question is, this individual seems to have some tightening of the muscles during intercourse,
Okay,
so the partner cannot fully
got it.
penetrate. How do you overcome if this is in the brain?
So a lot of it is about, so when we're talking about muscles, just like when we're stressed, our muscles contract. And so everything is in the brain. So like the fear, the anxiety, all of that, it's really about relaxing and being patient with one another. So perhaps you can't, you make an attempt and you can't penetrate. It's just like relaxing and trying to when you say take your mind off of whatever is causing the tension, and focus on the connection with the individuals. And there's also ways that you can, digital penetration is safe and fine, and it may not be exactly what you want, but it could be a compromise until the person can get to a place of relaxing for full penetration. I wouldn't say use lubrication and continuously trying, because you don't want to hurt anyone, but it's really here where it has to get relaxed and comfortable, and sometimes that takes a while, takes time.
Thank you, Tanya. So our next question says, so it's fine to ask someone to get tested. What do you do if they get offended?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and it's more of a you question than a me question. But I think the conversation, like I said earlier, should stem from, it's not about trust. It's not about saying someone's nasty, dirty, or doing whatever. It's literally about, I want to engage with you in this way. My health, I don't want to compromise my health, and this is for anybody, anywhere. I don't want to compromise my health, and so it's important for me that we know our STI status, like whether it's HIV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and this is going to give me peace of mind, and I'm actually going to enjoy it better because I don't have to worry about contracting an STI or transmitting an STI. And so it's really about the communication, and if they get offended, I don't want to say, well, you don't need them. There's just more communication that actually needs to happen.
Thank you. And our next question is, and you spoke about this previously, but can you go over the recommendations of lubricants again?
Yes. So water-based is the gold standard lubricant, especially if you're using latex condoms. It also can be helpful for just overall dryness for some people, but understanding it is water, and so therefore it's going to evaporate. The next one is silicone. So typically recommend a company that has medical grade silicone, so that we know that it's safe. And if you're not going to use a silicone based like toy or item, because you don't want to do that together, that's usually not the best practice. But silicone gives you a little more slip, and it doesn't dry out like a water-based lubricant. So that could be used with someone or just for dryness. Now they also have one that is a hybrid where it's water and silicone. So it looks, I'm gonna use the word creamy or cloudy because it's two things mixed together, but you can use that as well. So you get the slip of the silicone, but you have it kind of like pared down with the water being used. And then there's glycerin. And so glycerin is also one that's slip and moisturizing. So like if you think about your dry skin in the winter, a lot of lotions even, now don't use lotion, but a lot of products have glycerin in it to retain and moisture. So you can use glycerin. And then you have things that are aloe vera or aloe gel that you can use, as well as some of the natural oils. I use the example of coconut oil, but you really need to talk to the person or look at the products, because you want to use the pure, natural, not processed coconut oil. And so that can be used, and depending on if you're having sex, it can be used on a non-latex condom. We don't advise it, especially if you're concerned about pregnancy, but we know it doesn't break down a non-latex condom like it would a latex condom, but it is safe.
Thank you. And what are the benefits of anyone working with a sex educator to help with intimacy or any concerns that they have? And how does someone go about finding a sex educator, a sexuality educator, if they were interested?
Yeah, so we have one of our most, I guess, utilized organizations is the American Association for Sexuality Educators, Therapists, and Counselors, or Counselors and Therapists. It's called ASECT. I can't write it in the chat, but it's aasect.org. And so it lists certified sexuality educators, certified sexuality counselors, and therapists. The benefit of working with an educator is that you get the information, and they typically meet your needs based on, your own personal identity, culturally appropriate, age appropriate, and they can offer some counseling. A counselor can also provide education and counseling. So like, it's almost like there's not the biggest difference between a certified educator and a certified counselor is that you get more of the education, and that's what we've been trained in, because we can design curriculum, but we also can counsel. Whereas a counselor might have a different background, like social work and not education, but they can provide counsel. And then the therapist might actually be a social worker who can also counsel, has information where they can educate, but they can also prescribe medication. Some of them are psychiatrists, psychologists, or other doctor related fields where they provide you also therapy. So they're trained in therapeutic practices that are a little bit deeper than your basic counseling. And so ASEC, you can go there, you can type in your city or state and get a list of people who are available to you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing your time and your expertise with all of us today. If you'd like to watch this webinar again at a later time, it will be available on our website within 2 to 3 business days. If you have any additional questions, please send it to us at any time in 3 ways. Send an email to help@aamds.org, call our helpline at 800-747-2820, extension 2, or submit a question on our Facebook page. On behalf of the Aplastic Anemia and MDS International Foundation, thank you for joining us today and making us your resource of choice for information on bone marrow failure diseases. The AAMDSIF Medical Advisory Board and team are here to support you and your family as we have done for the past 37 years. This concludes our program. Thank you, Tanya, so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.